Hello YouTube, my name is Mark. This is Nixon Motorsports Garage. This channel is all about motorsports, from race cars to exotic cars, even simulators. Today's video is a short video of preparatory work that you might need to think through for engine dyno work and tuning. So come on, let's get into it, all right? So in preparatory work for engine dyno, what are the type of things you need to think about? It's some little details, but I think it's worth covering today. So as some of you know, this winter project, I'm converting this entire Formula 1000 race car to a new Motec package, all new electronics, ECUs, sensors, and on and on and on, right? A lot of work yet, a lot to do. But in about 2-3 weeks, the engine will be on the dyno, and this is where we'll be doing the actual tuning of the engine with the new electronics package. So that's pretty cool, right? But there's a few things you need to think about, and that's what this video is about today. So the two topics really are fuel. What type of fuel do you intend to run? And then it's the more little details of wiring the ECU and the electronics into the engine. So the second topic's about not really all the sensors per se, but two specific sensors that are critical for all engine control units, and that is the ref and sync signals of the engine. So I want to talk to you about those and some of the differences and trade-offs that we're doing for this build, okay? So come on, let's get into that. So as you look forward here on the engine, this is the ZX10RR motor, sorry, I paused, the 2017. Again, this is my backup motor. You can tell, you know, the wiring, all this is work in progress, it's not done. But this is the motor equivalent that I'll be running for my primary motor, which is the 19 version. And so the first thing I want to talk about is fuel. That's probably the quickest part of the conversation here. And what fuel can you run for your race car, and what fuel should you run? And some classes, as many of you will know, define specific fuel that you must run for your race car. Whereas in others, such as mine, I have a little more flexibility. I can run whatever fuel's at the venue. And so in my case, I've been running 100 octane Sunoco race fuel for the last several years. And now I'm rethinking, do I stay with that fuel, or do I decide to run a different fuel? Now's the time to make that decision, right? Because, you know, once we get the engine on dyno and we go through the tuning effort, things like fuel, exhaust systems, anything that will affect airflow, all that stuff, you want to make sure that's in place. So back on the fuel, I'm focused on building this engine and really putting an aggressive tune on it. I know the baseline previously of performance for the engine package, and the goal here is more performance, more insight on the motor parameters. If we can improve reliability, you know, those things, of course, are nice too. But fuel is a big part of a decision. And from a tuner's perspective, and so it's interesting talking to tuners on this, my tuner, for an example, will say, well, your NOx sensors are not going to really give you performance. They're an extra eye, if you will, or data input to the motor and how well and healthy it's performing under heavy load conditions, which makes sense. And so I will be having NOx sensors on this engine, but a tuner will approach a tune such as this race car project that we're doing, and he'll have to make a decision on, well, what fuel are we running, and then how aggressive and what he does in tune will be related to that. So for an example, if you're running pump gas, right, 89 octane or 91 or 92 octane, whatever you can get, motors will more than likely, under extreme load conditions, be prone to knock, and so a tune that's in place will have to be compensating for that, and so they'll leave some performance on the table for those extreme conditions, right? They'll maybe run it a little fatter in the fuel mix. You know, the advance in timing might be backed off a touch. The safety margin, right? And that's performance. Well, that's well understood. So what we're doing is re-looking at this from a fuel point, and I'm going to try two fuels. Obviously, the 100 octane unleaded I've been running. Yes, of course, that's known. So that will be fuel option A. The other is I'm going to run the Sunoco again, 110 octane fuel. Now this is leaded, so right, there's a difference. So why do we care? What's the whole deal about lead? Most very high-end race fuels are leaded fuels, and from what I've been told, the reason for that is lead has properties in it that helps minimize possibility of knock. And you can get race fuels that are leaded, you know, well up into the, I don't know, 116 plus octane ratings. So that's why you find a lot of leaded fuel for high-end race use. So this engine, though, as I said, I've been running the unleaded for quite some time, and the idea is to do a comparison between both the unleaded and the leaded. I'm not as concerned about performance difference. The fuel itself may or may not provide a little performance difference. From back to the tuner's comments, if you have appropriate fuel, so for an example, the 110 leaded fuel that I'm going to test, more than likely that engine will not be knock prone, meaning the tune can be as aggressive as desired, and in most extreme conditions, the motor will be safe from detonation, and that gives a tuner a little more freedom in how they'll approach the tune. I like that, right? Even though I'm gonna have knock sensors, right? I like that, so we're gonna be doing both. So the first thing in a decision for kind of a pre-work for dyno is what fuel are you gonna run, and be prepped for that, right? So anyway, that we'll be doing both of those, as I said. Okay, so the second topic is little details that you may not be thinking about, and that is with crankshaft and camshaft position sensors, right? If you think about it, every ECU, which is a computer, it has to know where in the rotation is the crankshaft, and same with the camshaft, right? It has to know when top dead center is precisely, so it can do things kind of important like you know, firing the coils and injectors and so on. Makes sense, right? So back to this engine. So this is a topic you have to think about. Now, most of you, if you're just doing a tune on your motor, you're not making any changes to kind of some of the fundamentals of the motor, you might not go through this. But in my case, I'm doing a whole new custom ECU and sensor package. And so the decision has to be made, you know, crankshaft, let's start with that. I'll be using the OEM sensor on the crankshaft, which is fine. And on the trigger wheel, so let me take you over here and show you this piece. So follow along. So hopefully you can see this. It's on my computer screen, but this is an example of a trigger wheel that mounts on a crankshaft. In fact, this is the stock or the OEM wheel for my ZX10 engine. Well, that has 24 teeth. An engine rotates 360 degrees, right, for every rotation. So I could leave it alone and just use it the way it is, but why would you want to make a change, right? Here's why. So if you think about a crankshaft and its rotation, And if you think about, like in my example, 24 teeth, well, that's actually 15 degrees between each moment that the ECU will see a new trigger, right? A new reference point on the crankshaft rotation. If a motor doesn't change its speed, let's say it's running at 5,000 RPM and just runs at 5,000 RPM all day long, right? You really don't need anything different, and why bother? But when you have high acceleration and high deceleration, for an example, if the engine itself, you know, from the ECU view, has more resolution on the trigger wheel, so for an example, a 60-tooth wheel, which a lot of people do in high-end racing, that gives you, I think, it's 6 degrees of reference between each trigger point. So the resolution does give you a much finer grain detail into the rotation detail, right? In between those points on a trigger wheel, the ECU has to interpret what it believes the reference point or where it is in rotation. And so there's some room for error. So the higher resolution you have in your trigger wheel allows the ECU to be much more precise. That's really all it comes down to. So what I'm doing, back on this picture again of the OEM wheel, I'm having a custom wheel made that's going to be a 36-tooth wheel instead of the 24, right? And so 36 tooth is going to change from 15 to 10 degrees of resolution just on the trigger for the crankshaft itself, okay? So that's kind of cool. So that's the first thing you got to think about. So I'm doing that. Now the second one, actually I find this fascinating. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. Kawasaki, specifically, 10 plus years ago, made a change. Now typical engines have a physical sensor, just like the crankshaft, on the camshafts to determine its rotation, right? And Kawasaki, about, again, 10 some years ago, they pulled their sensors off the camshaft itself. Instead, what they did is they put a map sensor on one throttle body directly on the engine. So the engine is using basically vacuum from one cylinder for its reference point instead of using the camshaft on the sync reference point, right? I find that fascinating. So we're going to be, and this is the sensor here itself, actually, if you can see that. So this little guy here on this engine, this is cylinder 4, it actually has a special port here just to pick up the vacuum reference for this engine, right? I find it fascinating. So anyway, decisions have to be made on that, right? So we've had a lot of conversations. Should we adapt the engine? Should we put, you know, a camshaft sensor on the engine somehow, right? I would have to modify the head or easier the head cover to do that. Moved away from doing that. It's a backup option if I have to. It's the worry of, you know, oil leaks and just other potential issues, right? So we're going to approach this on dyno. I'm going to drag you guys along. You'll see this as we go through it. We're going to approach this and try to use the OEM sensor for the sync reference as Kawasaki designed it. Now, talking to my tuner, he says it's actually very, very uncommon, at least to his awareness. I think he said Harley, some of their engines, if not all, you know, do the similar thing, but practically all engines, for the most part, have a physical sensor on the camshaft. So I find that interesting. We'll see how well it works. Hard to say. Anyway, that's it. We'll be up in dyno in about 2 to 3 weeks. It'll be interesting to see, obviously, how these sensors work, of course, but it's going to be fascinating to see how this package compares to the previous. Obviously, I'm hoping, there's some performance gains, right? So anyway, I'll be dragging you along. You'll be through that whole process. I hope you enjoyed this. That's all for today, man. You have a great day. See ya. Bye.